Many border cities in both Canada and the U.S. experienced a surge of visitors today. The wait times at the crossings as high as 3 hours this morning at the Thousand Islands Bridge as fully vaccinated vacationers, visitors and day trippers flocked south of the 49th parallel for the first time since March 2020.
But how symbolic is this moment for both countries as they come out of a historic shutdown and try to recover some of the money and memories lost during this pandemic? Let's ask a couple of former ambassadors joining us live on CP24 tonight. We've got Michael Kurgan, the former ambassador to the U.S., and Bruce Heyman, the former U.S. ambassador to Canada. Ambassadors, good evening to you both. Thanks for making time for us here on CP24. Ambassador Kurgan, to you first. How important is today's reopening of this land border?
Well, this is a really big deal because being November, and last night we had -5 degrees here in Ottawa, and that's just the time that people start heading down to Arizona and Florida for the next 4 or 5 months. So the timing couldn't be better for what I would call the long haulers. Those are the people who have either vacation homes or RVs, and they park them in the United States, and they're there for, for our Canadian winter. But for the short haulers, those people who have just to go over for a day or 2 or 3 days and have to come back, of course, they have to go through the PCR test, which we know is quite expensive and rather intrusive. I myself came back from Europe 3 or 4 days ago, and you have to go drop or download the ArriveCAN app, and that's a bit of a complication. So for people who are just going across the border for a short period of time, a bit more complicated. But generally great news, and we'll see whether or not we can lift the PCR test in the coming weeks.
Yeah, that's been the #1 criticism for sure, Ambassador, the PCR test kind of hampering travel across both sides of the border. Ambassador Heyman, if I'm not mistaken, you've actually been to Canada since Americans were allowed to start coming here back in August, right?
Yeah, absolutely. 3 times, in fact, and have traveled to Toronto, to Ottawa, and to Montreal. And boy, it was great seeing friends, breaking bread together, all of us vaccinated, of course, but it was great coming back north. And I'm really happy that we've begun to open the land border. Now, flying in for Canadians has been available all throughout this process, but now at the land border. And as the ambassador mentioned, it's really important for those folks who want to drive across and get to their warmer homes down in Florida or Mississippi or Alabama or South Carolina or Arizona, but mainly Florida and Arizona, as he pointed out. Really important. But a lot of small businesses really depend upon Canadians to come across the border. And those businesses are not going to yet benefit in the same way due to the testing and the cost of testing. But I think we'll resolve this over time. And that just goes with the long process that we're all trying to adjust to through COVID. But this is a really good day.
Ambassador Heyman, how do you think history is going to tell this story when you think back to March 2020 and the land border closing and everyone staying home for a few weeks and then delaying the reopening over and over again, and then it leads to 20 months. Like, how do you summarize that? How will we look back on this moment?
So I think we're going to look back on it at each individual micro level. Parents and children not being able to get together. Lovers who have not been able to see their loved one across the border. Parents and students not being able to come together on normal holidays or parent-teacher visits or those kinds of things. And just the normal interaction of friends. And so I think it's going to be a whole slew of individual stories about people and the missed experiences and the losses. And unfortunately, in some circumstances, we've lost loved ones that we weren't able to be with during those critical moments. And I think that's the story. But it's going to be a story of strength and adaptability and how we've endured our 2 countries through this. We'll come out stronger and better at the back end, but no doubt people have felt pain.
Ambassador Kurgan, what does this mean for the economies of these 2 nations? We are so interconnected. I don't think there's another 2 countries on the globe more interconnected than Canada and the U.S. How does both countries' economy get back on its feet now?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, during the lockdown of those 18 months, I mean, the essential travelers could go back and forth, and that meant our commerce going across on land borders did not really suffer that much. I think what was the problem is that entrepreneurs are people who are looking for new business, smaller business people, certainly the tourist people who depend on both sides of the border of the incoming tourists coming from the United States on one way going north and Canadians going south. They suffered tremendously. So our hope is that, unfortunately, it's going into winter. There are some Americans who do like to come up and ski in Canada, but we've lost some time. And I think if we can keep this border open, certainly by the spring, then we'll see a kind of flowering, I think, of the small entrepreneurs going back to business as usual, provided they're still in business. But the big corporations have been able to find ways to have their employees get resident status in the other country, or have worked ways of working through telecommunicating and so forth. So I don't think the hit has been as bad as some people had anticipated. But certainly as we go forward, if God forbid we have another pandemic of sorts, I think the two countries, having had the experience of this situation, will be better prepared to figure out how can we work together so that we use, let's say, a risk assessment as opposed to shutting and closing the border entirely. But that's a subject for another discussion.
Well, it's all about diplomacy, isn't it, Ambassador Kurgan? How do you think these conversations will unfold now with the new ambassador to Canada appointed?
Well, I must say we're looking forward to it, you ambassador. We've got a terrific charge d'affaires here. Arnold Chacon, who's done a grand job. But obviously, an ambassador is an ambassador. He has a profile in his public appearances and so forth. So we're really willing and waiting to welcome Ambassador Cohen to come up to Canada, and will be sort of the interlocutor, the prime interlocutor between ourselves and the United States. You will have, of course, the support of the White House and the State Department. So hopefully with him here, we'll start to make some gains, which not that we have lost gains, but it's always better to have somebody who has the direct confidence of the president.
Ambassador Heyman, we thought it was a long time before you arrived here, 9 months of a gap between your predecessor and yourself, and now it's been more than 2 years since Canada has actually had a representative here from the White House. Do you think that that played into the land border being closed for so long? And had you still been the ambassador here in Canada, how would you have helped facilitate it to try to convince the U.S. to reopen its land border when Canada did?
Well, that's a good point, and one never knows whether that would have made a difference or not. But I'll tell you what I learned. When I came to Canada, there were a whole slew of issues that I thought were most important: trade and energy and the environment and geopolitical affairs and the way Canada and the U.S. play on the world stage. But as I traveled across the country, it was very clear that the top issue Canadians thought about was the border. And they definitely told me that they didn't want it thick, they wanted it thin, and they wanted to move quickly and find ways of getting across the border easily. Those Nexus cards became very valuable. I'll tell you, it is a real important issue between our two countries. And hopefully we learned a lot, as the ambassador just mentioned, through this last pandemic, that if, God forbid, we're faced with something similar in the future, we don't have to go this same route, that we can find alternative routes going forward. And having an ambassador in place will enable us to deal with that.
Well, we appreciate both of your time tonight. Ambassador Heyman, Ambassador Kurgan, thank you both so much for making time for CP24 tonight.
It's a pleasure. Be healthy, everyone.